The blizzard swallowed the valley in a single hour. By nightfall, the wind screamed like a living thing, but the teepee at the edge of camp glowed softly, untouched by the storm. Outside, Mark was losing his fight against the cold. His tent was coming apart. He grabbed the frozen ropes, but the canvas ripped wider with every gust. His hands were useless. His lips had gone blue. The cold was winning. Only hours earlier, he'd stood outside that same teepee, full of scorn.
You are wasting hides, Paul. A tent can't beat 40 below. A second skin? It's foolishness. You'll freeze just like the rest of us. That mocking voice. It had sounded so clever at noon. Now it was just noise.
But inside that glowing cone, Paul sat warm. What did he know that Mark didn't? Hours before the blizzard tore across the valley, the sky had been heavy and gray, promising only frost. Paul dragged a thick buffalo hide across the snow toward his teepee, his breath clouding the air.
Another hide won't stop that cold, Paul. You are burying yourself in foolish hope.
His voice carried through camp, sharp with scorn, but Paul's hands never paused. Inside, he knelt and began to measure. 1 hand's width from the outer wall.
They don't understand the difference between a wall and a pocket of air.
Beyond the trees, the northern sky was changing, bruising into a deeper gray.
It's just a tent. The wind'll laugh at your extra skin.
Paul tied another knot, then glanced toward the darkening ridge. The storm was coming. The first cold gust rattled the canvas. He worked faster. The liner only half finished. A handful of settlers gathered, their skepticism cracking open. Paul worked on, his voice low but steady.
Still air doesn't carry heat. The gap keeps it trapped where the fire can warm it, and the smoke, it draws the draft upward, spinning the cold out the top.
A pocket of air? It'll fill with frost and ice before dawn. You are building a coffin.
Paul didn't look up. He pulled the next hide into place, his fingers threading leather with practiced speed. A sudden gust hit the teepee full force. The canvas shuddered, and snow began to hiss through the seams.
The wind's testing the seams already. Good. Let it find nothing but leather.
Outside, the trees bowed under the first real blasts. The sky had gone the color of old iron.
You'll be digging yourself out come morning if you don't freeze solid first.
Paul said nothing. The liner was 3/4 complete, the fire pit still cold. The storm had arrived. The full force of the blizzard detonated against the ridge. Snow drove sideways like shards of glass. Paul pulled the last hide into place, his fingers numb as snow began sifting through the unfinished gap.
Now the fire. The cold's already chewing at the edges, but the liner will hold.
He struck flint. The kindling caught, and the flame spread, casting orange light across the hide walls. The smoke rose, straight and clean, sucked upward through the gap between the liners. Not a wisp escaped into the living space. Heat pooled low, exactly as he'd promised. The floor felt warm against his boots for the first time in months. Outside, Mark's tent was no match for the wind. A long rip split the canvas from top to ground. Mark fought to hold the fabric together, but the storm peeled it back like a cheap layer of skin.
This can't be happening. Not like this. He was right about the liner.
Inside the teepee, Paul sat motionless, listening to the storm's fury and the silence of his own warm refuge. Through the screaming wind, faint shapes stumbled out of the white. 3 figures, barely upright, dragging a frozen bundle. Their tent had snapped like kindling. Thomas carried his daughter, Lydia, wrapped in a torn blanket, her lips trembling. Martha called out, her voice thin and ragged against the gale. But Paul was already opening the smoke flap.
Get inside. There's heat. Go.
The cold ate our shelter. Lydia can't stop shaking.
Mark, crouched behind his ruined tent, saw the family vanish into the glowing cone. A cold sneer cut through his shivering.
More mouths won't make your tent warmer, Paul. The miracle skin is a joke.
Paul ignored the shout. He eased the child toward the fire and pulled a dry hide around Martha's shoulders.
They'll need a liner too. I have hides left, but there's no time. We will build you a shelter like this. A second skin. Then the cold can't reach you.
Paul led Thomas back into the storm, to the collapsed canvas and broken poles of the family's shelter.
We'll raise a new frame. Then the inner skin, leave a hand's width, just like mine.
One extra layer won't stop this wind. My wife and child can't take another night like this.
The gap traps still air. The fire warms it, and the smoke pulls the cold draft up and out.
Listen to him. A second skin won't save you. It'll just be a prettier grave.
Paul didn't flinch. His hands moved with a rhythm born of repetition, tying the hide tight to the pole.
I can't lose them, but I don't know this. Show me what to do.
The blizzard battered the camp. Snow dug under every seam, and the new canvas snapped like a sail in a gale.
Pull it tight from your side. If the wind finds a gap, it will tear the heat right out of us.
The liner was a patchwork of hide and hope, far from finished. The storm wasn't half done with them. Inside Paul's tipi, Martha slumped against the liner, her breathing shallow. Lydia's cries cut through the fire's crackle.
Thomas, I can't feel my hands. The cold is inside my bones.
Finish this liner, or they freeze tonight. The fire is low, but they're still alive.
Outside, Mark's tent was dying. Another long rip opened, and snow poured in like a burial.
He was right. Every seam of my tent is a lie, but I can't crawl to him.
Paul and Thomas drove their numbed fingers into the work, tying knots that held the hide against the gale.
Pull it across the gap. The draft must rise, or the smoke will choke us.
My wife, my daughter, they're alone in there. I am wasting time on a wall.
Mark watched them from the dark, his pride now a frozen chain around his neck. He didn't call out. The liner was still half a prayer, and the cold was gaining on all of them. The last hide was lashed into place. Paul and Thomas stood back, their breath ragged, the work finally whole.
Light the fire. Let's see if this second skin holds.
They struck flint. The flame caught, and the smoke spiraled upward, as clean as the first. Thomas brought his family inside. The heat pooled at their feet, and Lydia's shaking finally stopped.
It held. Thank God, it held.
Outside, the blizzard had torn Mark's tent to ribbons. Canvas flapped like a broken wing, burying itself in snow. Mark staggered free of the wreckage, his body screaming for heat. He saw the new tipi glowing, mocking his pride. Mark didn't move. He couldn't. The word help was a frozen stone in his throat. He watched the family's tipi swell with light, and he stayed in the cold, a man unasked. The liner had saved the family. But Mark's battle was not with the storm. It was with the sound of his own voice. Inside the warm tipi, Paul knelt beside Thomas, who still watched the smoke rise as if it were a miracle.
It held, just as it did for me. But I didn't think of this design. I was taught it.
Taught? By who? This could save hundreds of families.
Paul's gaze drifted to the flame, his voice dropping to something older.
Years ago, on the plains, an old man named Metho found me half frozen. He showed me the second skin, how the air and smoke must move together.
The memory hung in the air, a vast camp of tipis under a gray sky, the elder's knowledge woven into every seam. Outside, Mark had crawled into the lee of a drift, his body convulsing with cold, still too proud to beg.
He said he learned it from them, and I laughed at him.
I am only passing on what the plains peoples perfected over centuries. I didn't invent it, they did.
His story wasn't finished, but the lesson was clear. The liner was a gift from a people the settlers never truly saw. Paul pulled back the smoke flap and stepped into the teeth of the storm to find Mark. He found him crouched in a drift, face pale as the snow. Paul stood over him.
Come inside, Mark. There's still warmth. Your pride won't keep you alive tonight.
I don't need your charity. I'll manage.
Paul shook his head, the wind whipping his words away. He knelt close.
You think I invented this? I was no genius. An old man on the plains taught me when I was as stubborn as you. They survived 40 below for centuries with this second skin. I only copied their wisdom.
Mark's jaw clenched. The truth hit harder than the cold. Paul stood and walked back toward the glowing cone, leaving Mark alone with the storm and the silence. The revelation was a door left open, but Mark still had to choose to walk through. Alone in the frozen dark, Mark replayed Paul's words over the howl of the wind.
I called him a fool, a coffin builder. I stood there and laughed.
His tent was a memory now. Shredded canvas, buried in the driving snow.
He tied those hides with a pattern, a hand's width. I never watched close enough.
The cold burrowed deeper, his fingers wooden, his thoughts slowing to a crawl.
I can't build that second skin. I don't know the knots, the gap, the way the smoke must go.
Snow drifted over his boots. His body warned him in sharp, stabbing waves. Move or die.
The only warmth left in this valley is inside his walls, and I threw it away.
His eyelids grew heavy. The frost reached for his core. He knew the secret now, but knowledge without action was a cold companion. Mark forced his frozen legs to move. The glow of Paul's tipi was a beacon in the whiteout. He reached the flap and pushed inside, collapsing onto the warm earth. The tipi was empty. Only Martha and Lydia huddled by the fire.
Mark, Paul is with Thomas. You are half dead. Stay by the fire.
Mark crawled to the center pole, his fingers touching the inner hide wall. The gap was precise, the air still and warm.
It's so simple. A second skin. The smoke pulls the cold straight out. I was blind.
Martha pulled a blanket around Lydia, watching him with guarded eyes. The warmth was a gift he hadn't earned.
This is what I mocked. This saved the family. And I am only here because I had nowhere else to freeze.
You were cold, too. The fire is nice.
Mark couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the liner, the second skin that Paul had woven with patience he never showed. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, Mark finally understood. The liner wasn't just a wall. It was the wisdom of centuries, and he had been too proud to see it. But pride is a stubborn wildfire. Mark couldn't sit in that tipi another hour, relying on another man's work.
I've seen the design now. The second skin, the hand's width, I can build it myself.
He took a hide from Paul's stack, his numb fingers clumsy, and slipped out into the storm before Martha could protest. In a small spare tent, he raised the hide against the canvas, tying it with whatever knots he remembered. The liner hung loose. Gaps yawned at the seams, but Mark was too frozen to notice the fatal flaws.
Now the fire, once it's lit, the smoke will pull the cold out. That's how it works.
He struck flint. The fire caught, but the smoke curled wide, choking the tent, not drawing upward. A violent gust peeled the hide away from the canvas, and a blade of freezing air sliced into the space.
The gap, I got it wrong. The cold isn't being pulled up. It's pouring in.
He collapsed beside the dying embers, his body shaking uncontrollably. The second skin had failed, and so had he. Paul returned from the family's teepee to find his own shelter quiet. Martha sat by the fire, her face tight with worry.
Where's Mark? He was half dead. He should be here.
He took a hide and left. Said he could build his own. I couldn't stop him.
Paul didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fur wrap and plunged back into the whiteout, heading for the spare tent. He found the small tent, collapsed inward, snow burying the canvas. Mark lay still, frost already forming on his lashes.
Foolish, stubborn fool.
He hoisted Mark's limp body over his shoulder and fought through the gale, step by step. The wind screamed as if it had claimed a victim and now refused to give him back. Paul shoved through the teepee flap and laid Mark near the fire. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin the color of bone. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He simply pulled the liner tight, fed the fire, and waited to see if Mark would live. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and Mark's shivering finally stilled. His eyes opened, clouded and weak.
The liner, it's still here. He brought me back.
Paul knelt nearby, unlashing a section of the liner. He didn't look at Mark, but his hands moved with clear intent.
Watch this time. The width is the secret. If it's too tight, the smoke can't draw. Too loose, the cold finds a path.
He pressed the hide against the pole, tying it exactly as he had done 1,000 times, the leather biting into the wood. Mark dragged himself upright, his arms trembling. He reached for a strip of leather, fumbling.
Show me. The knot again. I need to learn it right.
Paul nodded and placed his own hand over Mark's, guiding the leather around the pole. No judgment, only the patient rhythm of the craft.
He could have let me die, but he's teaching me instead. Why?
The storm outside reached a new pitch, but inside, the liner was being rebuilt, stitch by stitch, by 2 men now. They lashed the final hide into place. The inner wall was complete, a second skin against the storm. Paul knelt by the fire pit, flint in hand. One spark and the kindling caught, a small flame breathing life into the dark. The flame climbed, and the smoke found its path, streaming upward through the narrow gap without a whisper of wind. The familiar warm cone formed, glowing orange against the dark. Heat began to pool at their feet. Heat bloomed across the floor, wrapping around them like a living thing. Mark, bundled in blankets, held his hands toward the fire. His fingers tingled with returning life. He watched the smoke rise in a clean column, disappearing into the dark above. No cold draft touched him.
So this is what it feels like, to be inside the design, not fighting it.
Outside, the blizzard reached its violent peak, a roar that shook the poles, but the liner didn't flinch. For the first time in days, Mark felt no fear of the cold. Only the silence of a shelter that worked.
How did they know? All those years ago, before any of us ever came here.
They didn't have a moment of discovery. It was generations of winter, of watching the smoke move in the cold steel life.
He spoke of the plains in winter, of teepees dotting the snow like breathing hills, and of elders who tested every seam.
Mador told me his grandmother learned from her grandmother. 1,000 winters of trial, error, and patience.
The fire flickered, shadows dancing on the liner. Mark didn't move.
They understood that still air isn't magic, it's physics, but they read it in the way the smoke curled, in the frost lines on the hide.
Mark didn't interrupt. For the first time, he listened not to argue, but to understand. Outside, the wind shrieked against the walls, but inside, there was a new stillness.
I thought it was just a tent, but it's a library of the dead, written in leather and smoke.
The storm would rage for hours more, but the lesson had been planted, and the silence between the 2 men had changed. Dawn came slow and silent. The blizzard had spent its fury, leaving the world buried and still. Paul pushed back the frozen flap and stepped into the blinding white. Mark followed, squinting. The teepee stood like a monument, its liner still hugging the poles, smoke curling gently.
I was wrong, Paul. It's not just a tent. A second skin beats 40 below. I owe you my life and the truth.
Mark's voice was rough, but there was no mockery in it. Only the weight of a man who almost died. Paul met his eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. No gloating, just quiet acknowledgement. He swept his gaze over the drifted camp, the other teepee, where Thomas's family still slept warm. The evidence was all around them, written in snow and leather, and for the first time, Mark saw not a collection of hides, but a lineage of wisdom that had sheltered peoples for centuries. Inside the other teepee, Thomas opened his eyes to the silence. The liner had held all night. He shook Martha gently. Lydia yawned, warm. They crawled out into the blinding white. Thomas spotted Paul near the smoking teepee and pulled him into a rough handshake, his eyes wet.
Paul, the liner kept us alive. I don't know how to thank you.
Before Paul could speak, Mark stepped forward, his voice carrying in the quiet air.
Thomas, the design isn't Paul's. He learned it from the Plains peoples. They've used it for centuries. It's their wisdom, a second skin, a tent inside a tent. We owe them everything.
Thomas looked from Mark to Paul, then back at the tippy. Martha held Lydia, the truth settling on them.
Then we must remember them. Their knowledge saved us.
In that frozen morning, the truth had been spoken. The second skin was a gift, not an invention. Later, while the family warmed by their own fire, Paul stood a short distance from the teepee, alone with the snow. Mark trudged through the drifts to stand beside him. The silence was comfortable now.
You saved my life when I deserved to freeze, and you showed me something older than myself.
You'd have done the same. The knowledge isn't mine to keep. It belongs to those who taught me.
I'll never doubt a tent again, or the people who understood winter before any of us were born.
Paul nodded, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his weathered face. They watched the smoke thread upward from the liner, a language neither owned but both now spoke. Their shared silence was more honest than any speech. The second skin had taught them both. Survival was a story passed on, not a secret to guard. And in the vast white after the storm, that story had found new listeners. Later, Paul stood alone outside the teepee, the morning sun casting long shadows on the snow. His memory drifted back to the plains, to the old man who had taught him the way of the second skin. Matweo's hands had moved with the patience of generations, each knot a lesson in stillness.
He gave me this knowledge freely. Without him, I would have died that winter, and so would Mark.
The smoke in that teepee had risen the same, a lesson written in physics and spirit.
You saved my life twice, old man. First with your hands, then with your teaching.
He turned and stepped back inside his own teepee, where the liner glowed softly in the morning light. The smoke still followed the ancient path upward, a quiet echo of Matho's lesson. He watched it for a long while, the silence full of gratitude. Outside, the teepee remained, a second skin against the world, its lineage unbroken. For years after, when settlers spoke of the winter of '91, they didn't dwell on Mark's doubt. They remembered the tent inside a tent, and the man who listened to the people of the plains. The knowledge spread quietly, one family to the next. A second skin passed on, and when the next blizzard came, there were fewer frozen bodies, fewer broken shelters, because one man had been humble enough to learn, and another had been humbled enough to listen. The teepee, with its inner wall, became a symbol, not of invention, but of inheritance. It stood against the white, a cone of warmth in a frozen world. The smoke rose, threading through the gap, a thin line of survival, and in the stillness, the second skin endured. A gift from those who knew the winter long before. The story of the tent inside a tent would outlive them all.